Good evening. Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be able to welcome you all to what promises to be a wonderful occasion here tonight. I am delighted that our colleague Niall Kirkwood is about to deliver the Frederick Law Olmsted Lecture on Mumbai, Elegy, Matters of Design in an Arduous Landscape. Niall does wonderful introductions to the lectures. They are very long, and based on my experience of the length of his introduction, I am only guessing that his lecture will also be not short. Therefore, I will be even shorter than my normal, very brief introductions. Just really to say what a wonderful event this is. I think, as you know, this particular lecture coincides with the completion of Niall's term, which he did at the end of June of 2009 as the chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture. That came also together with a number of significant administrative responsibilities, where in addition to being the chair, Niall had been also the program director in the department, the coordinator of design and the environment in the MDES program, and of course the responsibility also for the Center for the Environment and Technology here, that he has that ongoing. He was the founding member of that center and is, of course, continuing to be involved with that particular project. One of the things that I think is really great at the moment in the school is the variety and range of conversations that are taking place. So, as I mentioned, Niall is talking about Mumbai, is talking about a city. Last night, the Department of Architecture had the return of nature, and they talk about nature while the landscape architects talk about urbanism or talk about the city. The only thing is that often when architects talk about nature, it also tends to emphasize the visual dimension of nature. And one of the things that I think is really important about the way in which landscape architecture engaged with the phenomenon of nature, even in the very moment of its formation, was through the phenomenon of nature methodized. Nature as something which is seen already through this phenomenon of being described as something which is methodized because of the relationship, not really to nature as naturalism, but nature as something which was already a depiction of nature, therefore an artifice through painting, was precisely the knowledge that the engagement with nature was in fact with nature as something which was specifically, deliberately methodized and therefore artificial. That's sort of one thing. The second thing is the fact that the relationship to landscape and the relationship to nature is so often, so clearly linked to the processes that are involved in landscape, and again in terms of the understanding of the landscape or nature as process. And I think this is something that Niall has really spent an enormous amount of time focusing precisely on this understanding of the way in which sites broadly, and therefore urban sites as landscapes, are really very important sites that have gone through a history of evolution and history of processes. Therefore, the focus that I think has been so significant in his work on brownfield sites, contaminated sites, sites that are not really so-called virgin sites for intervention, but sites that then, precisely through their own sort of history, are sites that are constructions, very specific constructions. Not that there is any site that is not constructed in a way, but this, I think, aspect is something that is key in terms of the emphasis on the relationship between technology and design, but also on the relationship of the investigations of the urban sites as sites that have actually gone through a whole series of procedures. I think he has demonstrated this scholarship and this focus through a number of studies: the art of landscape detail, weathering and durability in landscape architecture, and manufactured sites, rethinking the post-industrial landscape. The focus in terms of our school of much of this work also more recently has been the series of studios that have been taking place in Mumbai, India, and I see that there's a wonderful set of books here. I see V.S. Naipaul, which seems very fantastically promising, that we are going to hear specifically about this 3-year set of investigations that were run, I think, also with Nazanin Cooper, who was your collaborator. And I think this was an important thing to really see how these kinds of urban sites, post-industrial sites, may now become new sites of opportunity, new sites of interaction. And I think that the very nature of that engagement is de facto something which is collaborative, hybrid, but also something that is cross-disciplinary, because it's dealing with the urban, with landscape, with issues of the formation of architecture. So I am certainly looking forward to Niall's presentation, and please join me in welcoming Professor Niall Kirkwood.
The story is told of a Sikh who returned to India after many years, sat down among his suitcases on the Bombay docks and wept. He had forgotten what Indian poverty was like. It's an Indian story in its arrangement of figure and properties, its melodrama, its pathos. I had learned, too, that escape was always possible, that in every Indian town and city there was a corner of comparative order and cleanliness in which one could recover and cherish one's self-respect. In India, the easiest and most necessary thing to ignore was the most obvious, which no doubt was why, in spite of all I had read about the country, nothing had prepared me for it. Marine Drive, Malabar Hill, the lights of the city at night from Kamala Nehru Park, the Parsi Towers of Silence. These are what the tourist brochures put forward as Bombay. And these are the things we were taken to see on 3 successive nights by 3 kind people. They built up a dread of what was not shown. The other city, where lived the hundreds of thousands who had poured in a white stream in and out of Churchgate Station. Gradually one discovers that in spite of its appearance of chaos, in spite of all the bustling white-clad crowds that by their number would appear to defy or to make worthless any attempt at characterization, this degradation was charted, as was the Indian landscape itself. It had been measured and surveyed and sketched and remains recorded in all its absurdity, in the various collectorates where the title deeds wrapped in red cloth or white cloth rise in bundles from floor to ceiling. This is the result of an English endeavor answering the Indian need. Definition, distinction. To define is to begin to separate oneself, to assure oneself of one's position, to be withdrawn from chaos that India always threatens. These are the words of V.S. Naipaul. To talk this evening about the city and landscape of Bombay, or Mumbai as we'll learn it is now named, is to talk about definitions of beauty, the divisions of work, ideas of the sacred, meaningfulness, purposeful change, stories and storytelling, terror, patience, and time. The passage I read, taken from the very early section of Area of Darkness, tells of the ambivalent affair of Mumbai as a city and introduces the inherent contradictions of this most cosmopolitan landscape, a landscape of daily migration and imagined return, resurrection, and decay, perched on the sea and yet anchored to the soil of the Indian continent, fabulously rich but yet achingly poor, a historic trading seaport and now a global corporate center as well as home to multiple local street microenterprises, grossly overcrowded with social fragmentation and yet tolerant to a point of the multiplicity of diverse ethnic backgrounds and religions, with a core of civic landscapes and heritage buildings, yet overwhelmed with overburdened infrastructure, sewers, water supply, roads and railways, and proliferated with squatter settlements on marginal lands. The city of Mumbai still holds sway as India's industrial, financial, and cultural capital, one that is geographically rich, ecologically resilient, politically corrupt, creative, industrious, stressed to breaking point. A dense, complex, unsanitary urban land set in a sultry environment, drenched by the monsoon, and currently in economic and cultural flux with, as the New York Times notes, quote, dizzying promise and turbocharged ambition, end of quotes. The words above harmoniously resonate with a hard-worked land, with what I'm calling tonight an arduous landscape, a city encumbered by fragile but resilient populations, bestowed with history and a sacredness by many, a geography constrained by the sea, saturated with the sweat of labor and shaped by monsoons and the mechanics of real estate, yet as V.S. Nepal has again written, quote, continues to be cherished, but continues at the same time to be used with no regret attached to its disintegration, end of quotes. It is also home to the dreams, talent, and creativity of local fisherfolk, industrialists, hawkers, gangsters, artists, traders, millionaires, trash collectors, film stars, paupers, and multiple residents and rural immigrants who work in the teeming offices and street and home businesses. It is a modern city of the 3 Ps, progress, poverty, passion, and pollution. All with the capacity for change, set within a lush, verdant, yet vulnerable peninsula landscape of mangroves as shown here, tidal estuaries, forests, and beaches. Yet Mumbai is a grossly inhospitable urban environment where access to the fundamentals of shelter, water, power, sanitation, open space, clean air, security, humane public transport, and non-corruptible governance, planning, and municipal officials cannot always be taken for granted by a majority of the inhabitants. Even for those who have access to such services, the city is vastly overcrowded with intense traffic congestion and dwindling expectations for the quality and health of city life. Mumbai ranked 163 out of 218 cities worldwide in the Forbes Quality of Life Survey and 124 out of 130 cities in The Economist magazine's Intelligence Unit's Hardship ratings. So, this is an elegy of sorts to the city by the sea. A funeral song, a poem, a dirge? Well, maybe. The demise, or at least the decline of this city, continues to be reported at regular intervals by international agencies, Western think tanks, and global media, yet it refuses to die. In fact, these very conditions appear to galvanize the city into daily small-scale interventions and lurching episodes of vast-scale new engineering construction. Phoenix-like, it prospers, or at least survives at the micro level. So the question of Mumbai elegy, ? Remains open. It suggests that in looking at Mumbai, we may also be looking at an authentic future for the city. Hardly a just city, hardly a good city, or a world-class city, but one, nevertheless, that is more modest and skeptical about its privileged access to global realism, its socio-evolutionary edge over other lifestyles, its monopoly on multiculturalism and creative individualism. It is also possible to adopt an interpretive perspective of the increasing urban chaos, dislocation, and fragmentation for the landscape, to see it along the lines guided by apocalyptic visions of future cities, dystopias, of the kind present in movie forms as a Biryani Blade Runner, or the punk science fiction novels of William Gibson, such as the Sprawl or the Bridge trilogies. The converse is, however, a more plausible and a more likely future for Mumbai. The maintenance of an urban entity that copes, or just manages to cope, and does perhaps manage to achieve the end of providing a location and a purpose for work, however humble, a space for living that enables personal dignity to be partly maintained, and for an inhabitant's quality of life to be just that little better than it might have otherwise have been. It is, in short, an alternative form of cosmopolitanism, and a form of cosmopolitanism that is ultimately about shaping the world in significant yet incremental ways. I propose to you tonight, through the City of Mumbai, a different approach and persona to landscape and urbanism, not the overarching control of the traditional master planner, with everything in its place and a place for everything, nor the similar control by graphic description. Rather, my proposal for you to consider tonight, and to consider only, is for the concept of a modern city and a modern city life that is carried out through precise routines of use and engaged, lived, urban experience. It's true, the present Mumbai is not easy to become attached to when many in this audience are much used to more, to civic relaxation, to the good life, to urban enjoyment, the safe chance encounter, the clean, secure, and possibly at times modestly occupied streets, pavements, and restaurants. If, as a number of people believe, Mumbai is seriously out of control and that we are simply rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, or more importantly, what can we ask is Mumbai really attached to? To the idea of a city-nation? To a god? And which one of the 330 million Hindu faces of God do you mean? Just choose one. To the concepts of place and placemaking, as we've been taught? The answer I give you is sincere, as it is possibly ridiculous. It is attached to nothing but perhaps the legacy of Dwanda, or the daily transaction. It's nothing less than a manifesto identifying itself not by religion, nationality, or race, but by the fact Mumbai is, and always has been since inception, first as fishing village, then trading post, a city of entrepreneurs, sellers of anything and everything, including eternal life, spices, cotton, silk, mangoes, and pineapples, and yes, even the detritus of work in these rusted second-hand tools. From a 10-year-old street vendor on a sidewalk fiercely guarding his or her little business, to the tycoons and their dreams of acquiring Wall Street and Hollywood. And make no mistake, they're coming this way. The city understands money with both the open, ostentatious show of it and the hidden, manipulated secrecy of it. Covert, untraceable cash transactions are at the center of virtually every area of Mumbai's life. In real estate, obviously, in trade, in the public laundries here at the Dhobi Ghats, a prime example of one of the daily routines of use, and yet another, the dabawallas or tiffin lunch delivery dealers, in government corruption, in street hawking and begging, and perhaps more extremely in the Bollywood film industry north of the city. The author, Sokatu Mehta, who writes so intensely about Mumbai as his hometown from his adopted home in New York, notes, quote, "Mumbai is a golden songbird. It flies quite quick and sly, and you'll have to work hard to catch it. But if you do, a fabulous fortune will open for you." This is one reason why anyone would still want to come here, leaving the trees and the open spaces of the villages, braving the crime and the foul air and the water, end of quotes. In the tradition of other major trading cities of the world, Mumbai has taken the energy, deeds, words, and images of others for its own ends. Snippets of Manchester, England textiles, the spicy silks and sandalwoods of Istanbul, Venice, Lisbon, London, Persia. Yet with its boundless energy, Mumbai's chaotic and overtaxed environment conveys something ultimately profound and positive for its population and its own future. It is a city in India where caste does not matter, where a woman can dine alone at a restaurant without being harassed, and where you can marry the person of your choice. The call of Mumbai is also about the realization and a modern sense of human freedom. It also suggests a point of departure for understanding the city. It consecrates the hope that cosmopolitanism has also a place for the incremental and humble vernacular, the quotidian, so often incompatible with any iconography of the aggressive city-state, with the compulsions of a global market, and with the demands of an international knowledge industry. This alternative departure has been the concern of activists, writers, filmmakers, and some designers who formulate at the margins of contemporary civic culture and economics. They have helped to define the defined movement for alternatives that plague global capitalism today, the way, as noted by the Indian intellectual Ashish Nandi, that, quote, dysentery once plagued Europe's triumphant civilizing missions in the tropics, unquote. On the other hand, they are more often than not contained and constrained by the matters of daily life and by the necessities of survival, work, and of earning a living, and by life in the city. This, in a sense, is not always seen as a constant, rather an opportunity to allow Mumbai to slowly and incrementally adjust, open up, connect, close, and change with the daily cycle of the workday. And so to matters of design, the subtitle of the lecture. Mumbai disrupts and contradicts many of the existing categories, histories, and narratives of urban and landscape description, analysis, and finally action. The aim here is not to isolate, carve up, repackage, and represent Mumbai as an exceptional, just, and humane modern urban landscape, however impossible that task could be. Nor is it to confer an elevated status on Mumbai as a model for other global cities, again, however far-fetched that may seem. Rather, my intentions tonight are to show how a city such as Mumbai can be used to offer up new interpretations about the resilience and also the breaking points of landscape systems and of human fortitude, give greater openness for designers to the needs of the majority, and open up design experimentations and gestures within landscapes with limited resources. Most studies in Mumbai and other cities in India from the 1960s onwards have either been narrowly empirical, with a general bias towards simple, or not so simple as it turns out, problem solving in the areas of housing, transportation, sanitation, and public recreational space, or their descriptions of the city fabric have been overly generalized into single descriptive categories, such as the pre-colonial, the post-colonial, the industrial. Reports such as this one, which is quite famous, the Vision Mumbai, prepared by the McKinsey Group in 2003, display statistics to represent urban conditions as crises requiring immediate and urgent intervention. And Narendra Nair, chairman of Bombay First, notes in the introduction, quote, "The way things are moving, the city will collapse very soon. Bombay is decaying and no one seems to have a clear idea of how to stop it." End of quotes. The Vision Mumbai 8-point program of boosting economic growth and the so-called quick wins, the 1 to 2 year projects, address the catastrophe of mass housing, the crisis of overcongestion, the collapse of infrastructure, the calamity of flooding, that usually, as in this case, elicit well-publicized symbolic and or political responses by national, state, and city leaders, and then are politely but deliberately ignored. The use of statistics to describe complex physical urban conditions have conversely been reflected in the use of abstract concepts to define the emerging city with terms such as mosaic of culture or contested terrains. And while these concepts are inadequate for capturing changed conditions, they become dangerous in recent formulations such as encroached public space, deteriorating environment, and the most commonly used term, the informal. Such concepts guide design and planning interventions in the city that only respond to generalized conditions and disguise the many ways in which the city environment is currently inhabited, used, contested, and finally understood. And furthermore, these generalizations fail to acknowledge the complex conditions of legal and illegal multiple tenancies and ownerships, mixed land uses, interstitial spaces, for example, in the densification of MADA lands, the Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority lands, chawl and squatter housing as shown here, and the extension of family home structures. The legal and illegal commerce, hawkers in the street, all the systems of locally based commerce which characterize this contemporary metropolis. The non-formal processes are normally associated with urban phenomena such as squatter settlements and street hawkers, but it can be seen in Mumbai as a condition that is not confined to specific urban programs or practical activities. Rather, it systematically permeates many processes of urban and landscape production and reproduction, planned or unplanned, scrutinized by officials or not. In that sense, the non-formal processes incorporate, on the one hand, daily interaction and communication between people and use that leads to micro-change and alternatives, whether it involves charity, commerce, coercion, corruption, or capitulation. However, non-formal processes also include and found here in conventional planning and urban management practices, where official procedures are often circumvented. So instead of a sharp division between the formal and the non-formal, they blend together into micro-scale hybrid practices of daily living and shaping the city landscape of Mumbai, for example, in expanding legal and illegal living work locations, restructuring of the mill lands or multiple occupancy of space in and around markets, beaches, rail corridors, and streets. A word now about the nature of the academic engagement with the city. Following a visit to Mumbai in 2004 with Russell Sana, who was the then GSD Associate Dean for External Relations, a vertical research effort was established featuring studios, research seminars, and exhibitions, which started in 2006, to investigate the city and the surrounding metropolitan region. And the ambitions for this work were fourfold. First, to explore the overlap and tensions between projecting broad alternative futures for Mumbai and developing a systematic set of tools, design tools, and techniques that could be replicable across the city at project and micro scales, such as this work here by Robin Perkins, rainwater catchment filtration and overlay technology. Second, to explore environmental processes as design generators in urban conditions with limited resources, but with extremes of population density, physical deterioration, and spatial demarcation. Third, to use the idea of purposeful change, whether social, technical, aesthetic, or political, in the urban landscape as a means to address the issues of the sacred, the symbolic, the sustainable, and the very ecological basis of metropolitan Mumbai, whether in terms of open space, river and wetland systems, local drainage, shown here, waste or air quality. And finally, to explore non-traditional forms of analysis and site investigations through, in this case, studio members' personal agendas in the city that deal with Mumbai, the human body, with the world that is lived in, a spiritual world, environments that encourage social interaction, participation, and disagreement. And these have included, for example, the film documentation of what were hair-raising commuter train rides by the class, girls' elementary education in Mumbai and both the buildings and spaces that occupy them, hawking and street negotiations. And this is some work by Adrian Heflick on her investigations in Mumbai on how negotiation and selling is actually carried out. Sacred sites, kachka and paka, the raw and cooked materials that are used in construction. Looking for these places where, as it were, Nepal's cherished self-respect may occur. And this work was co-led with visiting critic Nazneen Cooper, Assistant Dean Planning at Harvard FAS, born and raised in Malabar Hill in Bombay, and who was, in a sense, our guide to the city in all things. And a range of reproducible design prototypes were then tested that addressed, at the very local level, multiple hybrid conditions of sanitation, transportation, commerce, sacred space, flooding controls, housing, and programs such as schools, markets, workshops, meeting halls, toilets, and gardens. For the purposes of the studios, we hypothesized that no single viewpoint could claim ascendancy, and that any designer, whether at the scale of the building, the landscape, or urban fabric, must be open to the needs, desires, realities of the varying populations who coexist within the same urban space, the pressures on the city and the metropolitan area from outside, as well as the constraints brought about by published local regulations and laws, and the forms of non-formal planning and design practices that actually work productively in this environment. In particular, we examined projects, experiments, and interventions that have been undertaken, for example, in the Dharavi district, as well as the discursive writings, operations, and media in which new ideas and theories were being discussed. The intention was to probe whether there really was a truly local form of Mumbai urbanism or murbanism and to what extent it could be traced at the micro level through traditional and modern practices of construction and use. The first option studio, which started, it seems a long time ago, but it was actually back in 2006, considered the fate of 600 acres of urban lands, mill lands generated by the closure and current abandonment of, at that time, 58 separate historic mill sites built more than a century and a half ago in the center of the city. The second studio, called Mumbai Margins, Rethinking the Island City, in 2007, reconsidered the renewal of housing district lands, infrastructure, and public open space conflicted with severe environmental and overcrowding problems. And the third studio, Mumbai Metropolitan, in 2008, looked at the development of the infrastructure of new communities, townships, and city districts as the city expands north and northeastwards, and their relationship to the existing suburban and urban fabric. And from this material and the work of the two recent research seminars, a book entitled Mumbai Matters is in making with Berkhauser Press at present. I now want to look at a series of research topics about the city and to kind of show examples of the research work that address predominantly the subject of water. But really, the question is how to proceed, how to address the multitude of topics that surround the city and its environments. So that I'm proposing tonight to structure the design topics, the environments, explorations, and speculations in and around the city in the form of an index to balance objectively, as much as it can be, the various participants, aspects, forces, and influences at work in the city. The index is the most formal and objective of written and graphic structures. It imposes a mental and physical order in a somewhat complex, chaotic, and incomprehensible situation, text, place, or set of spaces or conditions. And I would suggest that Mumbai may have that complexity here. So the narrative here relies more on a daily, diurnal, or seasonal ebb and flow rather than on linear narrative. But I do want to clearly acknowledge the influence here of Joan Wickersham, and author of a recent Pulitzer Prize listing book, The Suicide Index, as really providing an elegant demonstration of the index as a creative tool. So for the remainder of the presentation, I've selected just a few of the index entries to demonstrate the smell, the sense of the sacred and profane, all true matters of design in the interactions of Mumbai day and night. And the first entry under A is appropriately Apollo Bunder, Arrival at. The portal of the Gateway of India at Apollo Bunder, designed, I correctly noted, by the Scottish architect George Whittet, and built in the Indo-Saracenic style to commemorate the visit of King George V and Queen Mary in 1911, is, like so many aspects of Mumbai, ironic in being not only a symbolic place of arrival, but more pragmatically a place of departure. In this case, for the colonizers, the 1st Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry, the last British troops to leave India, exited under this archway on the 28th of February 1948 and signaled the emergence of the new democratic Indian nation. If there's one public space that's representative of old Bombay, it's the Gateway. It stands sentinel, perched at an awkward angle on the edge of the land beside the imposing Taj Hotel. With a low parapet and a wide gap on the seaward side, where a ramp leads down to where murky waters of the Arabian Sea wash the lowest stairs. This is where shabby boats offer cruises around the harbor, and hawkers wander selling postcards and cardamom and pistachio-scented kulfi. And on the night of November 26th, 2008, while ironically India was playing England in an international cricket match, and in a cricket-obsessed country as India, that means everybody was glued to the televised game, another kind of arrival came from the sea. 10 young men connected by cell phones to their handlers in Pakistan landed from a rubber boat on the western side of the seawall near Badar Park in the Oberoi Hotel. And fanning out across the Polo Bunder, the city was under attack once more. But more on that later. Atlas, a geographical survey. Mumbai on Salsette Island on the western coast of India consists of two distinct regions, the city, also known as the island city, and the suburban district. The island city, shown here on the western Malabar coast, is the most populous city in India and the second most populous in the world. And along with the neighboring suburbs of New Bombay, here, and Thane, to the north here, it forms the world's fourth largest urban conglomeration with around 19 to 20 million people. The city of Mumbai covers 438 square kilometers of the island, Salsette Island, although almost a fifth of this is occupied by the national park that you can see here. This means the urban areas, for example, around the airport and the Mithi River, shown here, are condensed into about 350 square kilometers, with a high gross residential density about 7 times the density of London, and where open space is limited, comprising only about 1% of the city's area. And this is something I believe Raoul taught me, but I saw it in Mumbai. For visitors, when you think of the city, you take your right hand and you kind of pinch the fingers together. And there you have actually Mumbai, the gateway to India, Malabar Hill, Mithi River, and the fingers showing the movement of the city upwards and downwards. And Mumbai's more affluent classes live in a corridor stretching along the city's north-south axis here in taller residential structures surrounded by densely packed low-rise squatter dwellings. The city of Mumbai, shown here in the satellite photo at the tip of the peninsula, itself suffers from important forms of disenfranchisement. Although as capital of the state of Maharashtra, it provides the lion's share, about 70% of the state tax revenues, little of it comes back to the city. And even more importantly, control of much of its own functioning is in the hands of the state rather than the city itself. And lack of investment means that urban infrastructure, such as existing sewer outlets and outfalls, cannot meet the demands of a growing population with water and drainage. Bombay, names for. Originally called Heptansia, city of 7 islands, by the Greeks, Bombay entered the millennium in a new guise, behind a different official name, Mumbai. The name itself was not in the least new, but had been current when the island was first inhabited by the Koli fishermen and their families. And yet Bombay, ironically, was never an indigenous Indian city. It was built up by the British expressly for maintaining trade links with the Indian subcontinent, and was never expected to grow to be a large town, let alone a city. And the early population consisted of Koli fishermen, East India Company officials and clerks, and migrants from Gujarat, including a community of Persian Zoroastrians known as Parsis, who, despite their small numbers, figure very significantly and powerfully in the city's commerce to the present day. In the 19th century, the British began a massive land reclamation project that eventually fused the islands into the single continuous peninsula that is today jutting out into the Arabian Sea, and with a protected eastern coastline harbor of docks, quays, and jetties. It was therefore not formed around a sacred place, nor a landscape feature, a river, a lake, a mountain, nor was it structured in relation to the cardinal points, as a traditional Indian town might have been built. Mumbaiker Salman Rushdie in Midnight's Children also opens with the genesis of the city and his full-blown fantasy of modern life and the ancient ways in Bombay. Before the East India Company built its fort at the dawn of time, when Bombay was a dumbbell-shaped island tapering at the center to a narrow shining strand, when Mazagon and Worli, Matanga and Mahim, Salsette and Colaba were islands too, in short, before reclamation, turned the isles into a long peninsula like an outstretched, grasping hand reaching westwards into the Arabian Sea. In this primeval world before clock towers, the fishermen who were called coolies sailed in Arab dhows, spreading red sails against the setting sun. They caught pomfret and crabs and made fish lovers of us all. And above it all, the benign presiding influence of the goddess Mumbai Devi, whose name, Mumbai Devi, Mumbai, may well have become the city's. But then the Portuguese named the place Bombay for its harbor, and not for the goddess of the pomfret folk. The Portuguese were the first invaders, using the harbor to shelter their merchant ships and their men of war. But then one day, an East India Company officer saw a vision. The vision, a dream of a British Bombay fortified, defending India's west against all comers. Was a notion of such force, it set time in motion. The naming of Mumbai operated within the same context of historical pride that excluded the British interregnum and privileged the idea of an overarching Indian past. But added to the past time was a further element, territoriality, so that Mumbai was enormously incorporated within something which it had never formed part of, the 18th century Maratha Confederation. Mumbai was thus absorbed into its surroundings and the history of these surroundings. And in its renaming was asserted city identity, itself a complex interweaving and overlapping meanings, ranging from the post-colonial uncoupling and national identification through to regional patriotism. Next topic, Bollywood. Battered, dirty, overcrowded, and choked with exhaust fumes it may well be. But because of the reach of Bollywood and Bollywood movies, Mumbai is also the city of dreams, the fantasy for all people of India and beyond. Through Bollywood, the strife of urban life is offered relief and escapism through the mass cinema, originally coined in the 1970s, that is. Bollywood is a term popularly used worldwide, as if you might not know, for the Hindi language film industry. Based in the studio lots in Film City in Mumbai, most Bollywood films are unabashedly escapist, but a number of filmmakers have also tackled tough social issues or used the struggle for Indian independence as a backdrop for plots. The main Bollywood plots are intensely melodramatic. They frequently employ formulaic ingredients, star-crossed lovers, angry parents, love triangles, family ties, sacrifice, corrupt politicians, kidnappers, courtesans with hearts of gold, long-lost relatives and siblings separated by fate. Indian audiences expect full value for their money. Love triangles, comedy, daredevil thrills are all mixed up in a 3-hour-long extravaganza. This is a city that reveals itself slowly and incrementally. In the broad, choked, and endless main roads of suburbs and the chaos of shops, tall tenements, decaying balconies, electronic wires, and advertisements. Yet the film posters seem to derive from a cooler and more luscious world. promising a greater gaiety, an ampler hip, or bosom, I guess, here, a more fruitful life. Carrying capacity. I'm returning to Suketu Mehta, the opening of his wonderful book, Maximum City. There will soon be more people living in the city of Bombay than on the continent of Australia. Urbs prima in Indus reads the plaque outside the gateway of India. It is also urbs prima in mundus, at least in one area, the first test of the vitality of a city, the number of people living in it. With 14 million people, Bombay is the biggest city on the planet of a race of city dwellers. Bombay is the future of urban civilization on the planet. God help us. And this image here is, in fact, obviously not our work. This is from the Tate Gallery, the work of Urban Age Project from the London School of Economics. It's a comparison in topographic form of the city of London in the front, and to the same scale, the city of Mumbai, the downtowns of the two cities, side by side for visual comparison of density. According to extrapolations carried out by the World Gazetteer in 2008, Mumbai has a population of just over 13.5 million, and the Mumbai metropolitan area has a population of just over 21 million. The density is estimated to be about 22,000 persons per square kilometer, and Mumbai survives because it uses every material resource, including land, to its ultimate capacity. The rate of growth and increasing urban densities tax the land, and ultimately the population itself beyond hopes of reversal. The real question remains how much productive land, water, resources, environmental systems, and waste management are required to support Mumbai's population indefinitely at the current consumption levels. In attempting to address these questions, a more fundamental issue arises. What constitutes overpopulation within the Mumbai context? Carrying capacity, as it can be applied to an urban condition like Mumbai, is the number of inhabitants who can be supported in a given area within its natural resource limits without degrading the natural, social, cultural, and economic environment for present and future generations. Carrying capacity for any given area is not fixed, but may be altered or improved by technological means. However, once an environment is degraded, the carrying capacity shrinks, resulting in an environment that can no longer support the initial population it once had. And within this context, studio research advanced this idea to determine if the carrying capacity of individual districts in the states and the city could provide a model that can be integrated into the details of the new, in this case, modern resettlement initiatives. And in doing so, it raises questions of whether it is possible to define a measure of sustainability that does not already contain implicit assumptions about the solution to the problem of resource overuse and environmental degradation. Ultimately, it is about using a range of landscape design approaches and tools to rethink the island city and to counter the potential of geographically expansive collapses of natural resources and systems. It's less about beauty, less about gratuitous form-making and the creation of personal design ideologies. Rather, it's a focus on everyday persons and people's lives. So the ambitions of the studies that will be included in the book are to understand and include the city's physical and social margins, to address the question of urban sustenance for the majority of the population, to employ broader boundaries and definitions for improvements and renewal, and to incorporate the marginalized populace, plan beyond the economic limits, and to question social definitions. Chawl, a Hindi word for tenement housing and adjoining outdoor community space found in India, but with numerous examples in Mumbai. Built in phases related to the growth of mill or industrial complexes, the rapid growth in the mills was sustained by a large migration of mainly Marathi-speaking rural workers into the city. Most often, the male member of the family would work in Mumbai, leaving the rest of the family in the village. Eventually, the chawls became filled with entire families, crammed into single rooms, 4 to 5 stories high, with about 10 to 20 colis or rooms on each floor. And each block faces onto a courtyard or street or lane where the daily outdoor social life takes place. And housing consists of one all-purpose room off a central corridor that functions both as living and sleeping space, and a kitchen that also serves as a dining room for a total currently between 170 to 240 square feet for 5 people, although in this particular one there were 8 living at that time. People living in the chawls have little privacy, but on the other hand, this living situation also leads to an atmosphere akin to a communal family relationship within each block and grouping of blocks. Design in. There have been 4 tendencies observed in the current international attention as it relates to Mumbai and responses the city has made to the shape of the future. The first is not surprisingly focused on the rich trading and economic history of the island city and the resulting expansion in successive waves to the north and northeast, from fishing village to trading port to East India Company town to textile mills to financial trading houses. The second tendency, and one which often goes counter to or at least hand in hand with claims to its economic ascendancy, are the issues of injustice and the social agendas and actions to address the local population, and often more regional issues of need, the divides of wealth, the proliferation of squatter settlements, physical deterioration of the streets and buildings, lack of basic amenities, shelter, security, power, water, and sanitation. One car accident, one fraud, or one factory closure, and the same residents who are overwhelmed and helpless at the city's condition will be in the squatter settlements they supposedly ignore. The third tendency is to emphasize the importance and development, in the eyes of city governance at least, of the large-scale engineering and infrastructural changes that have been carried out to grow and modernize the city. These include the original leveling and filling and continuous reworking of the original archipelago, the islands, and the vertical architecture and civil engineering. The current Greater Mumbai and Island City response is to undertake even larger plans. The more recently completed Sea Link from Bunder to Worli, the new metro rail in planning, the continued expansion of Navi Mumbai, New Bombay, and then considerations of the portlands, the eastern seaboard, the mill lands continuing, the salt pans, and the airport lands. The fourth and final tendency is an alert attitude towards culture, an eye for the poignant frailties of the vernacular, and a breathtaking ability to evoke issues of great local import. None more so than the existing microscale divisions of work, and such as the Dobie Ghats laundry and the Dabba Walla shown here, that do work that is efficient in the city in moving lunches from home to throughout the city to and back to the rightful owner on a daily basis for a modest sum by legions of runners and agents. And this has led to a set of ambitions for the research. One is tied to the enduring importance of the larger Mumbai landscape, the region and the watershed. The second is the opportunity for bridging the traumatic chasm dividing the confident ruling majority with the mistrustful yet hard-working majority. A third is the persistence of the idea of non-formal intelligence about the pragmatic nature of daily human life, usually collective rather than individual, and how it serves at a city scale, it serves the city at a local scale. In short, the simple idea of the user-generated city. Ecology. Urban biodiversity of Mumbai may be categorized as natural, which includes the marine, the mangrove, wetlands, and thorough ecosystems, and human-made, which includes plantations, parks and gardens, campuses, and colonies. Travelers in the early 1800s described Bombay as possessing some of the most inspiring natural beauty and geographical features in the world. Yet the processes of urbanization had already started around 1700 with the evolution of the port and the protective fort area. And the biodiversity of the city also evolved with the introduction of exotic vegetation, parks and gardens, roadside trees in the urbanized region, adding variety to the natural flora already existing in the forests. Mumbai's original natural environment can be visualized really from a few remnant natural regions. The national park, shown here, Mahim Vikhroli mangroves, the Karnala sanctuary, and the beaches of Mandawa and Kahim. Yet Mumbai's marine ecosystem has remained diverse in spite of the disposal of untreated sewage into the sea. All the seashores and creeks provide shelter to diverse marine fauna and also attract large numbers of migratory birds. And the coastline of the city is indented with various creeks and bays, stretching from Thani Creek on the eastern to Madhvar on the western front. The mainland hills continue to be under threat due to indiscriminate quarrying, deforestation, and residential encroachments, which has resulted in soil erosion, groundwater depletion, and degeneration of the adjoining agricultural lands. Estuaries, marshes, mudflats, and agricultural lands are also vanishing in order to create sites for urban development and large-scale infrastructure. Small-scale rivers originate within the national park, and while the polluted Miti River, which gets much attention, originates from the Tulsi Lake and gathers water overflowing from Vihar and Palwan lakes. Except for a few lakes which supply drinking water, almost all freshwater wetlands have become heavily polluted and their surroundings denuded. In spite of these adverse environmental effects, Mumbai has sustained itself now mainly because of its sea edge and its natural forests. In short, the westerly Arabian Sea has become the savior of Mumbai. Strong sea winds clear the polluted air over Mumbai, and tidal flows clean the lakes, the creeks, and natural forests of the park, while the park has maintained the balance of natural biodiversity. Patrick Geddes. At the beginning of the 20th century, we find the work of a Scottish planner and academic, Patrick Geddes. Yeah, there's a you notice the continuity there? Noted educator, sociologist, and town planner engaged in Mumbai. Geddes' connections with India and Bombay are well known. He visited 4 times between 1914 and 24, staying in India for 2.5 years between 16 and 19. He studied towns and cities actually across India and taught at the University of Bombay, where he was appointed the first professor of civics and sociology in 1919. And he was invited to study and recommend ways of improving various towns and produced reports, multiple reports describing the recommendations for civic improvement. Luckily, Hugh, down in the Loeb Library, we have a number of the original Geddes reports from India. I have one here. I just wanted to read you one little passage, just to get you the sense of his writing style, but also the way he started to think. He's talking about overcrowding. When a third-class carriage is overcrowded, we do not need to turn out everybody, still less to knock the whole seating down. By removing a very moderate percentage of the passengers to another carriage, the rest becomes comparatively comfortable, and a very little more of such treatment makes them easy. So exactly it is with an overcrowded street or slum. And the difficulties see rather the clamant injustices, see indeed the gross and dreadful oppression of the poor, which has grown with city improvement, and is also far too common in India, that of raising rents by reducing the number of available houses, if not yet completely avoided, is at any rate minimized. It is most important for everyone interested in town improvement to consider very carefully the meaning of the phrase reducing congestion, in parenthesis, when applied, as it constantly is to the piercing of a crowded area by new thoroughfares.
For in practice, in spite of regulations and amiable resolutions, this process has historically been and generally is still unassociated with any adequate supply of new buildings for the evicted people. Get it? His interventions reveal considerable respect for the existing urban fabric, while maintaining old gathering spaces and structures by reusing them. His emphasis really turned on the interaction between people and place in the context of time. He first carried out a diagnostic survey addressing the geological, physical, social, religious, and cultural and town conditions in minute detail, district mappings, plans, sections, and detailed recordings of every tree, well, pond, lane, house, and street were carried out. In addition, health, disease, and population disbursement were addressed. And from this analysis, design ideas for conservative surgery, as he called it, were proposed, addressing food production, land supply, infrastructure, open spaces, water tanks, ponds, and places of gathering for women and children as insertions into the existing fabric. His was not a fragmentic vision. No doubt, but Geddes would have connected with the analysis of the current environment and centrality of ecological problems in prevailing modern life and thinking. Gurungaon. The cotton textile mills were Mumbai's and India's first modern industry, built more than a century and a half ago. The network of walled mill lands, public streets and lanes, workers' chawls, residential neighborhoods and markets are located in the 8 square mile area known as Gurungaon, the village of mills. The Mumbai cotton textile mill lands are located in the central downtown district, somewhere around here. To the east are the port lands. During industrial manufacture in the 19th to the mid-20th century, the city was pulled into a global rhythm of textile production, punctuated by the sounds of the siren between work shifts, the ties of the organized service and industrial classes. The network of walled mill lands, public streets and lanes, worker chawls, street markets are barely functioning or are closed. And this was a couple of years ago, 58 textile mill sites, 33 were privately owned. One is still managed by the Maharashtra state, their textile corporation, and 25 are managed by the government National Textile Corporation. The mill lands were and continue to be the subject of public speculation, acrimonious newspaper articles, intense public scrutiny by professional designers, engineers, government officials, and heritage organizations. And within the mill lands, cleared roads, working sewage systems, and 3 to 4 story housing blocks gave the impression of a modern city. But just outside the wall spaces lies a different world. And at stake for the mill lands were 3 major issues. The strategic location and role in the growth and expansion of the fabric of the city. The need to reconsider the structure and urban landscape systems of the district, the village of Mills, where the majority of the lands were located. And finally, the nature of regeneration efforts of individual mill sites as potential microscale models for reuse in other parts of the city. Monsoon. On Tuesday, 26th of July, 2005, saw record monsoon rainfall, about 37 inches in Mumbai, and elsewhere along the Western Ghats in a single day. Drainage failed completely, and water collected in heavy polluted areas. The city's stormwater drain, the 9-mile-long Mitti River, running from the lake to Mahine Creek, flooded and overflowed. Tidal effects compounded poor drainage and lack of land absorption. High tides caused the reverse flow of water from the sea into the drainage system. The loss of life of about 512 people due to accidents, mainly drowning and electrocution, was added to by major landslides. The plan you see here was actually carried out by Mary Gourley, and on the right she mapped all the flooded areas. At that time there was no map that was available of flooding, and using aerial photography and soil maps and other material, she actually mapped for, I believe it was the first time, the extent of the flooding in 2005. The flood showed the worst and the best of the city. Hundreds of people drowned, but unlike the situation after Katrina hit New Orleans, there was no widespread breakdown of civic order. Even though the police were absent, the crime rate did not go up. The population were too busy helping each other. Dwellers in the squatter settlements went to streets and took stranded motorists into their homes and made room for one more person in shacks, where the average occupancy is 7 to a room. Volunteers waded through polluted waist-deep water to bring food to the 150,000 people stranded in train stations. Impoverished families with little food gave it up to feed those who were wealthy yet trapped. Human chains were formed to get people out of the floodwaters. Most of the government machinery was absent, but no one expected anything else. Mumbaikars helped each other because they had lost faith in the government helping them. The city functions on such invisible networks of assistance. A quick shots of a project by Robin Perkins called Emerge Mumbai. One of Mumbai's biggest issues, as we know, is the distribution, control, and protection of water. The research by Robin combines the rediscovered technology of rainwater harvesting with successful Indian models for groundwater level water purification, consumption, and development. The proposal is flood mitigation tool and water supply system that can be implemented on an individual housing block or district level in the Mada or mill lands. 3 months out of the year, rainwater is in excess, flooding and backing up into much of the city and suburbs, with a stormwater system over 100 years old and in desperate need of replacement or repair. This is a result of poor and unplanned development, a lack of updated infrastructure, and a waste collection system that are inadequate to account for the growing population. So the investigation started by mapping out flood points for Greater Mumbai. An investigation of where and why flooding occurs led to regional solutions. Mapping and analysis led to the identification of critical areas for investigation, including government housing sites up for redevelopment, seen on the flood diagram. And the research continued by focusing on one critical 100-acre site located next to the Mithi River. It's able to accommodate the proposed redevelopment population and the relocation of settlements along the river. The strategy is to create a site that will maintain and use all the water on site while taking consideration spatial and cultural issues for Mumbai's water use and city life. The microplan is shown on 3 levels: the underground water system, the ground floor public spaces, and the above ground housing. The project, although site-specific in this case, is a model for public housing developments as well as other municipal and private developments and initiatives. And many of these low-rise sites are being developed into towers, maintaining the current current population, but providing additional apartments to address the needs of the growing population. Towers do not adequately address flooding, and they disregard many aspects of Mumbai's current housing, such as the semi-public balcony space and protected open lower spaces. Importantly, new government proposals fail to acknowledge the importance of the street in everyday life, whether it's a venue for washing, religious practices, social activity, eating, and family life. And for this piece of work, Robin Perkins was awarded the National ASLA Honor Design Award in 2008 and was a finalist in the Metropolis Magazine New York 2008 Next Design Generation competition. We're getting through it, don't worry. Odors. The particular pungent smell of Mumbai. Dry, wet fish competing with the hot, humid smell of 15 million human beings, and the need soon after arrival to walk, to breathe, to be grounded. It's the blue skin smell of the sea, no matter where you are in the island city, and the blood metal smell of machines. It smells of the stir and sleep and waste of 60 million animals, more than half of them humans and rats. It smells of heartbreak and the struggle to live, and of the crucial failures and loves that produce our courage. It smells of 10,000 restaurants, 5,000 temples, shrines, churches, and mosques. and of 100 bazaars devoted exclusively to perfumes, spices, incense, and freshly cut flowers. Religion and rituals. The religions represented in Mumbai include, of course, Hindus, Muslims predominantly, Buddhists, Jains, Christians, with Sikhs and Parsis making up the rest of the population. And this unique mix of cultures is due largely to the migration of people from all over India since the 1600s. And it has no need to look outside for its models of tolerance. It has hundreds of very different ethnic minorities, most of whom heartily dislike one another. But they have been tolerating one another for centuries. Each community has an intimate knowledge of the codes and festivals of each other. Hindus and Muslims belong to two different religious philosophies, social customs and literature. They neither intermarry nor dine together. Indeed, they belong to two different civilizations. To say that India is riven by myriad factions and castes, and more fundamentally both divided by two religions and united by daily worship, is to describe a particularly vicious curse. In the case of Mumbai, the fairs and festivals openly depict the multicultural nature of the city. Popular festivals include Holi, shown here, Ramadan, Eid, Diwali, etc. And here are a little more images from Holi symbolizing the arrival of spring. Ganesh Karathri is the blessed day where Lord Ganesh appears to confer economic prosperity to the people on earth. This is why it is especially tied to the city of Mumbai, celebrated between August and September. In a 15-day celebration, there is a vast procession through the streets that carry the gigantic plaster statues of Ganesh to the sea, to submerge in the sea. Through the streets to submerge in the sea. This process is known as Visarjan and is focused on Chupati Beach, accessing the Arabian Sea on the western edge of the city. Near the edge of the Arabian Sea, at the southern tip of Malabar Hill, several small crumbling stone-turreted temples and flower-garland shrines surround a rectangular pool of holy water, Ganga, amidst modern-day skyscrapers and encroaching urbanization. The pool has wide stone stairways on all four sides. The sacred waters of the Banganga tank in Mumbai are a vivid representation of the paradox of traditional life coexisted with unbridled modernization. The temple complex is overlooked by many tourists, but is one of Mumbai's holiest sites and one of the oldest surviving structures of the city. The spring is believed to be an underground offshoot of the Ganges, so the waters are considered just as sacred and effective for healing as those of the great river itself. And in the shadow of the present-day Mumbai most prosperous neighborhoods, the tank is spring-fed, and so its water remains sweet despite only being located a few dozen meters away from the sea, and continues to function as a timeless devotional hub, its tolling bells and mantra-chanting pujaris drawing devotees to worship the divine. Shiv Sena. And talking of devotees in present-day Mumbai, the city is governed by the ruling Shiv Sena party of Bal Thackeray, a reactionary, ultra-nationalistic, and extremely right-wing Hindu party that scorns not only Muslims but also Hindus from other parts of the country. The Shiv Sena, along with the right-wing BJP party, took control of central government in India from 1998 to 2004. The Shiv Sena is mostly made up of Maharashtrian Hindus who call themselves the sons of the soil. And in March 1995, this Shiv Sena, majority partner in a coalition, came into power in the state. It took a look at the awful urban planning problems plaguing the city, the infestation at corruption at all levels of bureaucracy in the government, the abysmal state of Hindu-Muslim relations, and he took decisive action. In keeping with the Shiv Sena's particular mix of regional chauvinism and nationalist hysterics, Bombay's Hindus managed to violently rewrite urban and landscape space as sacred, national, and Hindu. They also changed the name of the capital city from Bombay to Mumbai,
And once in power, the Shiv Sena decided to attack the most serious problem, the most serious. They went after artists, especially Muslim artists. The author Salman Rushdie's response to their narrow view of a Hindu Mumbai, as himself a Muslim in the light Bombayite style, these are his own words, was to write a book premised on the radical idea of a Mumbai broad enough to accommodate his florid, fantastical irreverence, which is now known, of course, as the Satanic Verses. Symbolic action. Despite protracted and often deep disagreements over the future of Mumbai, the vision of a comprehensive future for the city still remains alive in some quarters, most recently as an effort to transform it into a new Shanghai or Hong Kong or Mumbai as a world-class city. Planners in Mumbai no longer seriously consider architecture, though, as an instrument for the structuring of the urban landscape. This has partly to do with the attitude of architects who have not engaged in city governance sufficiently to influence planning policy, which in turn implicitly determines what they can build. In fact, architects and designers in general have almost no access to policy, and this is perhaps endemic of a larger cultural problem in a country where there's a slightly non-empirical bent of mind. And as a result, far greater premium is paid to symbolic action, represented often as policy decisions endorsed by politicians. Nepal touches upon this symbolic action at a more humble level when he describes in the area of darkness the sweeper who sweeps the corridor in his hotel, and at the end of the day it is dirtier than when he started sweeping. A symbolic action whose result is contrary to what is wanted. There is, however, a lasting belief in the collective community, whether as urban village, chawl, or township, particularly on the margins of the city. This is a short project by Alina Cho from the fall 2008 studio titled Nala to Nadi, Restoring Ecological Functionality and Awareness for a New Township. The study design establishes waterways and local drainage as a guiding principle to set up a basis for the construction of a new city township, and works at a threefold level depending on water event intensity and time scale. On the left, everyday stormwater proaction by reducing an interruption of the impervious surface, increasing soil infiltration and clustering development. And here stormwater is properly directed and filtered before reaching the city drainage. In the middle section, the seasonal monsoon protection by maximizing the open drain's water volume capacity, providing overflow tanks, and manipulating topography to guide rainfall and runoff traffic. The new township is less vulnerable to flooding. And then finally, at the largest scale on the right, climate change preparation. By concentrating development on the elevated ground and establishing a constructed mangrove wetland and a nursery in lower ground, the township is better prepared for the increasing intensity of the rainfall and sea level rise. I'll just go through these quite quickly, showing aspects of the rest of the project. Terrorism. Getting to the end, don't worry. In the very early morning of 26th of November 2008, I was in a room in the appropriately named Morning Blossom Hotel in Beijing with bad jet lag. Turning on the BBC World News on the television at 2:30 a.m. to pass the time, the breaking news and live footage of the terrorist attacks in the city, especially at the Taj Hotel near the Gateway, kept me awake the rest of the night and well into the next day. In October of 2008, the GSD class had actually passed through the metal detector barriers into the hotel lobby as a temporary respite from the afternoon heat. All during the day, crows flew in uncommon numbers over the red domes of the hotel towards the pool, wrote Marie Brenner in the Times. In Mumbai, the symbol of the crow is believed to be a messenger bringing warnings and messages from the dead, she continued. They flew through the banyan trees in the hotel garden all day long. During that evening, as you know, 10 young men connected by cell phones to their handlers in Pakistan landed by the western seawall near Colaba's Bunder Park, originally home of the Koli fishermen and close to the Oberoi. After resting, they carried out attacks on the Taj, the Oberoi Hotel, as well as the Leopold Cafe, the Metro Cinema, the historic Victoria Railway Terminus, and Nariman House, killing 183 people and wounding 239 over a period of 3 days. Mumbai's 9/11 was on the world news. It was obvious that the Taj would be a target, long an important hub in the city of the visible local ruling population, a meeting place for business, cultural, and artistic leaders, as well as family gatherings. The Taj is more than a hotel. Rather, it is a combination of old Bombay and modern Mumbai. It represents a place of opulence, optimism, and a symbol of free India deep in the psyche of Bombayites and Mumbaikers alike. It's not necessary to detail the 3-day encounter played out in real time on cell phones and television, but simply to note that following the bombing attacks of 1992-93 and the train bombings of 2006, the city again became the stage for radical national and global conflict and security breaches at the most detailed level. Here's what the Daily Times, reprinted from New York Times, said. In fact, they're quoting our old friend, Sugata Mehta, in response to this terrorism attack. The best answer, this quote, is to dream bigger, make even more money and visit Mumbai more than ever. Dream of making a good home for all Mumbaikers, not just the denizens of $500 a night hotel rooms. Dream not just of Bollywood stars, but of clean running water, humane mass transit, better toilets, a responsive government. Make a killing not in God's name, but in the stock market, and then turn up the forbidden music and dance. Work harder and party harder. If the rest of the world wants to help, it should run towards the explosion. It should fly to Mumbai and spend money. So I'm booking flights to Mumbai. I'm going to get a beer at the Leopold, stroll over to the Taj for samosas at the Sea Lounge, and watch a Bollywood movie at the Metro Cinema. Stimulus doesn't just have to be economic. As a footnote, the Taj Hotel reopened in part on December the 21st, 2008, after the installation of new precautionary measures, including metal detectors that had been removed the week before. The research work for this has been supported by one of the oldest stalwart industrial groups in the city. The Wadia Group, founded in 1736, and their affiliate, the Bombay Dyeing Company, based in Goregaon Textile Mill District. And in 1779, the Wadia Group were commissioned to build these ships for the British Navy and been actively engaged in Bombay's business ever since, as well as in the grand tradition of patronage. My thanks are given to the CEO, Nas Wadia, for his sponsorship, and a special recognition to my fellow co-instructor, Nazneen Cooper, as well as to Russell Sana, the person responsible for setting the compass to Mumbai. I also want to recognize all the students who participated in the classes from 2006 to 2009, some of who I note are here. Particularly to note the teaching assistants, all of them over the years, but particularly this year to Ming Thompson and Birgit Wurster for their assistance. I also want to thank Mohsen for his introduction and the Landscape Chair Charles Waldheim for his support of the talk, which has traditionally been given to honor the memory of Professor Al Fine of the Department of Landscape Architecture and his research and recovery in the 60s of the Olmsted legacy and legend. And also to take this opportunity to thank the Department of Landscape Architecture's faculty, administrative staff, and students for their support over my last 11 years as chair and program director. This is the end. India frustrates descriptions because everything you can say about it is true and false simultaneously. Yes, it could have the world's largest middle class, but it now has the world's largest underclass. And so with Mumbai, everything is expanding exponentially. The banking centers, the global reach of its film industry, its status as a financial gateway to India, as well as the squatter settlements, the numbers of absolutely destitute, the degradation of its infrastructure. So what is necessary? That was the unspoken but implied and unavoidable question everywhere in Mumbai, says Gregory David Roberts in his Shantaram book. When I understand that a great many of the characteristically perplexing aspects of public life become comprehensible from the acceptance of sprawling slums by city officials, to the freedom that cows have to roam at random in the midst of traffic, from the toleration of beggars on the streets to the complexity of the bureaucracies, and from the gorgeous, unashamed escapism of Bollywood movies to the accommodation of hundreds of thousands of refugees from Tibet, Iran, Afghanistan, Africa, and Bangladesh in a country that was already too crowded with sorrows and needs of its own. Yet Mumbai continues to be identified as a gateway world city in terms of the influx of global companies. It is still a city of ambition, progress, density, and passion, teeming with industry, a vast young labor force, and a capacity for change. Therefore, in summary, a set of continuities appear, as I said before, the enduring importance of the larger landscape, the region, the watershed, the opportunity for bridging the traumatic chasm between the confident ruling minority with the mistrustful yet hardworking majority, the persistence of the idea of informal intelligence about the pragmatic nature of daily human life, usually collective rather than individual, and the replicability of it at an urban scale. And finally, fourth, and maybe new, is the need for the creation of new stories and new myths about the city. We started this evening with a Sikh returning home, sitting among his suitcases on the Bombay docks. So let me return him home again by maybe some more modern means. The first thing I noted about Bombay on that first day was the smell of a different air. Again, writes Gregory David Roberts in Shantaram. I could smell it before I saw or heard anything of India. I know now it's the sweet smell of hope, which is the opposite of hate. It's the sour, stifled smell of greed, which is the opposite of love. It's the smell of gods, demons, empires, and civilizations in resurrection and decay. It's the blue-skin smell of the sea, no matter where you are in the island city, and the blood metal smell of machines. It smells of the stir and the sleep and waste of 60 million animals, more than half of them humans and rats. It smells of heartbreak and the struggle to live, and of the crucial failures and loves that produce our courage. It smells of 10,000 restaurants, 5,000 temples, shrines, churches, and mosques, and of 100 bazaars devoted exclusively to perfumes, spices, incense, and freshly cut flowers. Whenever I return to Mumbai now, it's my first sense of the city, that smell above all things, that welcomes me and tells me I've come home. Thank you. I think if there's time, if time-honored tradition, I'm happy to answer any questions. It's always a silence till.
Well, I think it's because people are freezing in this room. It's so cold. Next time I'm going to bring my blanket with me. So, any questions? Please, go ahead.
Just simple, I guess. It seems that
Okay.
that it seems that you've found. I mean, the city is sort of the extremes of what maybe a lot of other cities might eventually reach. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the ways in maybe in which we could learn or maybe transport some of the things that are happening in Mumbai now to other cities.
Again, the question of a very obvious one that happens in the academy is what can we take from this that we can then apply to other wheres? And I would urge a little bit of caution. What I would suggest is actually more possible is the opening up of another type of discourse, another type of discussion, experimentation, dialogue about alternative types of cities. We have assumed, or we bring to the cities, wherever we are globally, a certain expectations. I refer to them, the good life, the idea of what we expect and this of civic engagement. And you don't find it there, but you find something else that is maybe richer, maybe more challenging. And I think it's really opening that up as a discussion, as a possible form of future city, is where I think I would like to take that work, or where Nazneen and I would like to take that work. It's not a question of, this is very easily transferable to this other city. I don't think I'm at that point to be able to say that with any certainty. But I think it's really the opening up of, is this another form, alternative form of cosmopolitanism? Is this another alternative way of living in a city? Even though on the surface you may not like what it looks like, you may not like what it smells like, you may not actually feel comfortable there, but it works on a particular level. So I think that's, and we can pick it up in the seminar on Tuesday.
I think if you look at the word resilience, and when you pointed out the aspects where, because of Katrina, New Orleans was a failure, whereas Mumbai in some ways was more resilient, was there anything in the way the natural and the built fabric come together beyond the human sort of resilience that you think attributed to the success that Mumbai had, rather than having the same situation as New Orleans?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it really is less the physical environment. It really is actually the social and cultural, which has been often so missing in our discussions about the city. I really do believe it was actually inherent in the population. If you read it, although we couldn't experience it, if you read it, you still are shocked by the level of the breaking down of levels of caste, levels of order in the city, and the ability to help one another is quite remarkable. I don't know if there's a physical attribute in the city. The flooding, for example, the maps that were developed by Robin and others, actually show very clear correlations between the geography of the place and the flooding. It's really not rocket science. It's very simple. The areas that were mostly flooded were between the former islands, the filled areas. That should come as a great surprise. But I'd say at the present moment, I have not done enough work to know if there's actually then physical things that then could be transferred, for example. That's an easy comparison, with Katrina and New Orleans. I don't want to hold them up as this worked, this didn't work. There were other things, of course, in Mumbai that didn't work. The fact that people died because they were trapped in their cars and drowned inside their cars. You could argue, why are they still in their cars? Why are they trying to drive across? Electrocution, because they didn't switch off the main electrical power quick enough. But I think it's a matter of this, what I'm interested in, this is kind of micro-adjusting in the city, that it actually got down to a kind of local level. Also, they're very used to disasters. And somehow they're very resilient. They manage to always be able to handle them in ways that other places cannot. Yeah.
Thank you for that presentation. I think it was truly remarkable. I think you cover the whole range of things. I've been in Bombay, but not very frequently. And as you can tell, I call it Bombay rather than Mumbai, so it was some years ago. But, and I'm a planner, I should say. But it seems that you admitted very graciously, I think, that architects can't solve the problem. Planners can't solve the problem. Politicians can't solve the problem. Is there any way we can find solutions for cities of 40 million? Or have we got to go back to the villages and look at Gandhi again?
I hope not. I hope not. There's a couple of things. First of all, obviously, in the short period, which I believe was only an hour and a half, or 25 minutes, I had to leave out. I had to leave out quite a lot. Of course, I think where it starts is at the NGOs, the organizations, which particularly work at a local. Spark, for example, here working in Mumbai, has been able to achieve a great deal, both in terms of the developing of models of small-scale district remanipulation. It echoes slightly the Geddes work. I don't want to make too close a connection between them, but it echoes this idea of working extremely incrementally, and they are part of the Dharavi national kind of group, and offering obviously the opposing view to which is simply wholesale development, breaking into the 5 districts and developing. So I'd say there are, if it is not the architects, if it's not the, I believe there are these groups, and these groups are multi-headed and multidisciplinary. In a sense, they're made up of activists, public health, planners, and architects as well, social workers, and also, and it's my hope that particularly in a country which has only 3 small landscape programs for the entire country, and where landscape architecture is a small group of people, that landscape architecture as a field has an ability to engage at these different levels, both at the region, the watershed level, the district, and then down to the smaller level. Because the issues they're dealing with, as you know, are water, sanitation, movement, open space. So I think that's where it's already happening. And I don't suggest that it's waiting for us. It's already happening. But particularly there's NGOs like SPARC, S-P-A-R-C. No, no question.
Just stunned into silence now. Well, Neil, I think that really, as you said, I just want to underline the wonderful presentation. It's clear that there is this Scottish theme that's running.
It was not deliberate. I mean,
I think in a way it's also interesting to have the Scottish architect and the Scottish planner and now the Scottish landscape architect through your presence here of the kind of rereading of Mumbai, and your obvious love and passion, I think, but love is all right too. For Mumbai, I think comes very, very clearly through. I think that it's true that we've learned, I mean, more than anything else, probably a new kind of sensitivity, a new kind of tenderness in terms of the approach to the city. I do think that you've also left me with a little bit of a kind of caution. It's a bit like the wasteland, It's because of the fact that you apply the poetic reading to a certain kind of circumstance that is simultaneously full of this space of hope and full of this space of fecundity, but at the same time, there are sort of major problems. So the T.S. Eliot thing, in a sense, it also aestheticizes to some degree. It valorizes it through poesis. In some way, makes something that could be read in multiple ways, which I think you've sort of pointed out. Yes, which is the purpose. I do think that also sometimes prevents us, in a way, from action, because the poesis becomes so strong in terms of its conditions that one really dare not do anything, because the whole thing is constantly read as something which one reads with such kind of sensitivity. So I think, for me, it's interesting just talking about what happened last night, discussing nature, and tonight discussing the city. And in a way, I think it probably would be very interesting to try and push you to really not talk about the instrumentality of what can we do and what would be applicable to other places, but specifically then, what is the role in some ways, or what can we discover about the study of landscapes through this lens of a new form of kind of sensibility? And I think you've given us a lot of positive things and a lot of optimism, and maybe to start now thinking more explicitly about the potential repercussions of many of these thoughts in terms of landscape. But Anyway, wonderful, and many, many thanks for a very short talk.
Don't tell my
And-
wife.
And thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.